Rain pounded on the roof of the old farmhouse as Mary sat at the long dining table. Her father's words still echoing in her head. "You'll die alone without sons." The sting of it made her grip the edge of her chair tighter. She'd heard it her whole life. But tonight it cut deeper, maybe because part of her feared he was right. She stared at the cold stew in front of her, appetite gone. Across the table, her father leaned back, boots on the chair opposite, sipping coffee like he hadn't just gutted his own daughter. His face was withered, his eyes cold. "No man wants a wife who can't give him heirs," he said, voice low but sharp. Mary's hands trembled. She wanted to shout that love wasn't just about children, that she was worth more than her size. But the words lodged in her throat. She stood instead, pushing her chair back so hard it scraped against the wooden floor, and left the room without another word. Upstairs, she pressed her forehead to the cool glass of her window. Outside, the rain turned the dirt road into a river of mud. She had no plan, no future, and now, no hope. She wondered if her father was right, that she'd be alone until her last breath. The next morning, word spread through town that the spring auction was bringing in ranchers from all over. Mary hadn't planned to go. It wasn't for people like her. But the thought of being locked in the house under her father's eyes felt worse. She put on her heaviest coat, pulled her hat low, and walked into town. The auction yard was bustling, the air full of laughter, shouts, and the smell of wet hay. Mary hung back near the fence, trying to disappear in the crowd. That's when she saw him, a man towering over every other cowboy there. His shoulders were broad enough to block the wind, his had shadowing eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He was up for bid, not like cattle, but as a contract worker, 3 months of labor to the highest bidder. The women nearby whispered about his size, his strength, and the scars across his hands. No one knew his name, but everyone seemed wary of him. Mary didn't know why, but her heart beat faster. Something about the way he stood, still, calm, as though he'd seen storms far worse than this, made her feel both safe and unsettled. She told herself she was only watching out of curiosity. When the bidding began, voices called out quick and confident, then slowed. The numbers climbed higher until only one man remained in the competition. Her father. He smirked, clearly wanting to own the giant as a way to show off. Mary felt heat rising in her cheeks. She didn't know what came over her. Before she realized it, her voice cut through the air. "I'll double that." The crowd turned to look, shock written on their faces. Her father's smile vanished. He barked her name like a curse. But the auctioneer had already slammed the gavel. The giant cowboy was hers. When the man walked toward her, she almost stepped back, not from fear, but from the sheer presence of him. He stopped in front of her, his gaze steady. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep, slow, and carried weight. She nodded, trying to find words. "I'll explain when we get home." The ride back to the farmhouse was silent, except for the creak of the wagon and the patter of rain. Mary's father stood on the porch, arms crossed, face red. "What's this nonsense?" he demanded. Mary swallowed hard. "This is my choice. He works for me now." Her father laughed, cruel and loud. What could you possibly need a man like him for? He's not going to marry you, Mary. No one will." The cowboy stepped forward then, his shadow falling over her father. "You talk about her like she's a burden. She's not. She's worth more than you'll ever see." Mary's breath caught. No man had ever spoken for her like that. Her father opened his mouth to snap back, but the cowboy's stare was enough to shut him up. Inside, Mary busied herself with preparing a meal. Though her hands shook, the cowboy watched her, not in judgment, but as if trying to understand her. "You didn't have to bid on me," he said finally. She glanced up. "Maybe I did. Maybe I needed someone here who sees me differently." He studied her for a moment longer, then said, "Maybe I need someone who sees me differently too." The days that followed were unlike anything Mary had known. The cowboy worked from dawn to dusk, fixing fences, chopping wood, mending the roof, but at night, they talked, really talked. She told him about the years of being mocked for her size, for being unmarried, for not fitting into her father's plans. He told her about losing his family, about drifting from job to job, always seen as muscle and nothing more. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to her. "Mary, I think your father's wrong. You won't die alone, not if I can help it." Her chest tightened. "Why would you say that?" He smiled faintly. "Because I'm not afraid to marry a woman with more heart than any man I've met." The proposal wasn't grand or rehearsed, but it was real. For the first time in her life, Mary felt like she wasn't too much or not enough. She was exactly right. When her father heard, he scoffed. He's just after your land. You think a man like that wants a wife like you? But the cowboy didn't flinch. He stepped close to Mary, wrapping his arm around her. I want a wife exactly like her. And one day, I hope we have sons who inherit her courage. Mary looked up at him, her heart full, for once. Her father's words didn't matter. She had found someone who saw her worth, and that was worth more than any approval he could give. Their wedding was small, but the room was filled with warmth. The cowboy stood tall at her side, his hand in hers, his vow simple and sure. I will never let you believe you are less than everything to me. In the years to come, they built a home full of laughter, love, and yes, children, not because her father demanded it, but because they wanted it. And when Mary held her first son in her arms, she knew the old prophecy of loneliness was broken forever. And the giant cowboy who had once been a stranger at an auction became the man who proved her father wrong every single day.
On their 50th wedding anniversary, the ranch seemed to hum with life. Children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren filled the yard, their laughter drifting through the warm summer air. Long tables were set under the oak trees, heavy with food, while lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze. Mary wore a simple blue dress. It's the same shade she had worn the first time the giant cowboy took her dancing. Her hair was silver now, but her eyes still shone with that quiet fire he had fallen in love with decades ago. When it came time for speeches, their eldest son stood and cleared his throat. "Mama," he began, his voice catching slightly, "you taught us that love isn't about appearances or what others think you deserve. You taught us it's about building a life together, even when the odds are stacked against you." The cowboy's hand tightened around hers as their children and grandchildren nodded in agreement. Then it was his turn to speak. He rose slowly, towering over everyone just as he always had, but there was a softness in his expression. "When I met Mary," he said, "I wasn't looking for someone perfect. I was looking for someone strong enough to stand with me. She's been that and so much more. She's been my partner, my best friend, and the heart of this ranch." The crowd erupted in applause, but Mary's eyes stayed on him, her throat tight with emotion. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they danced under the string lights, their steps slower now, but still in rhythm around them. The family they had built together moved like a living testament to everything they had endured and overcome. Later, when the celebration had quieted and the guests had gone home, they sat on the porch once more. The moon bathed the land in silver light, and the air was thick with the scent of wildflowers. The cowboy leaned close. "Remember what your father said all those years ago?" Mary smiled faintly. "I remember, but I don't think about it anymore." "Good," he said, brushing a kiss to her temple. "Because the only truth that ever mattered was the life we made together." She rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. And in that stillness, she realized something. They had not just shared a love story. They had built a legacy, one that would ripple through the lives of everyone they had touched long after they were gone. In the years that followed their golden anniversary, the ranch became more than just a family home. It turned into a gathering place for the whole community. Neighbors came for advice, for comfort, for a place to rest when life had worn them thin. Mary always had a kettle on the stove, and the giant cowboy always had an extra chair on the porch. Young couples often sought them out, wanting to know the secret to such a long and happy marriage. Mary would just smile and say, "It's not about never fighting. It's about always coming back to the table together." The cowboy would add with a chuckle, and learning when to let her win. Even in their later years, they kept the ranch alive with their own hands. He still rose before the sun, checking fences and feeding cattle, though their sons often insisted on helping. Mary still tended her vegetable garden, her rows of tomatoes and beans thriving under her care. One autumn, when the leaves turned to gold and the air grew crisp, Mary fell ill. It was nothing sudden, just the slow wear of time on a body that had worked hard and loved deeply. The cowboy stayed by her side every day, bringing her tea, reading to her in the evenings, making sure the fire never went out. On a quiet morning, wrapped in blankets with the first frost sparkling outside, she reached for his hand. "Promise me you'll keep living after I'm gone," she whispered, He swallowed hard, his big hand covering hers. "I can't promise that," he said honestly, "but I can promise I'll keep loving you every day I'm breathing." Mary smiled, her eyes closing with a peace that came from knowing she had been cherished beyond measure. When she passed that winter, the entire town came to the ranch for her farewell. People stood shoulder to shoulder, telling stories of her kindness, her fierce spirit, and the way she made everyone feel like they belonged. The cowboy stood at the edge of the crowd, his face etched with grief but also pride. He knew she had not just changed his life, she had changed countless others. That night, alone on the porch, he looked up at the stars. "You were wrong, old man," he murmured to the memory of her father. "She didn't die alone." Surrounded by a family so big and so full of love, it could fill the whole sky. And somewhere deep in his heart, he knew Mary was still with him. In every creak of the porch swing, every rustle of wind through the trees, and in the laughter of the children who would carry their story forward for generations, the winters without, Mary were long and quiet, but the giant cowboy kept his promise to her in his own way. Every morning he still made 2 cups of coffee, one for himself and one for her. Setting it across from him at the kitchen table as if she might walk in at any moment, her blue dress still hung in the closet, her favorite boots still by the door, he didn't move them. The ranch felt more alive with her things around, as though her spirit still wandered the rooms, humming softly the way she used to. Neighbors checked in often, bringing pies, stew, or just warm conversation. His children visited with their own kids, who raced through the fields the way he and Mary had always dreamed they would. Every time he watched them, he felt her presence in their eyes, their smiles, even their stubborn streaks. One spring, a young widow from town stopped by the ranch. She had 2 little boys, restless and wild, and no one to teach them the ways of the land. The cowboy took them under his wing, showing them how to ride mend fences and respect the cattle. The widow often thanked him, but he'd just shake his head. "Mary would have wanted me to." Years passed. His hair turned snow white, and his steps grew slower. But his heart remained as steady as the day he first took Mary's hand. On a late summer evening, saddled his favorite horse, and rode out to the hill where Mary loved to watch the sunset. He dismounted slowly, lowering himself to sit in the grass. The sky was a wash of gold and pink, the same as the day they first danced under the string lights. He whispered into the wind, "I think I'm just about ready to see you again." That night, the giant cowboy didn't wake, but they found him in his bed, his hat resting on the chair beside him, a faint smile still on his lips. At the funeral, his children buried him beside Mary, under the old oak tree on the ranch. And in the years to come, when the wind rustled the branches and the porch swing creaked on quiet evenings, the family swore they could hear 2 voices laughing together, one deep and steady, the other soft and warm, still keeping watch over the home they had built. By their 10th anniversary, the ranch was alive with noise and motion, horses whickering in the corrals, chickens clucking in the yard, and the shrieks of 4 children chasing each other between the apple trees. Mary stood on the porch, hands resting on her hips, watching the scene with a mixture of exhaustion and joy. The giant cowboy came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. "You've given me more than I ever dreamed," he murmured. She laughed softly. "I thought you wanted a dozen children?" He grinned against her cheek. "We're not done yet." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat by the fireplace, sipping coffee while snow drifted past the windows. Mary's thoughts wandered to the past, to the girl she had been, to the voice of her father telling her she'd die alone. She realized how far she had come, how much of that cruel prophecy she had buried under years of love and work. Life still brought its share of hardships. Calves were lost to illness, fences washed out in spring floods, and more than once, they'd sat at the kitchen table, counting coins to make ends meet. But never once did Mary feel alone again. Her father began visiting more often. Age had softened him, and though he never fully apologized, his eyes held something gentler when he looked at her children. One summer, he even stayed for a month, mending fences alongside the cowboy, quietly building a bond that had once seemed impossible. Mary sometimes caught her father watching her with an expression that was half pride, half regret. She never asked what he was thinking. Some things were better left unspoken. On the 13th winter, when a blizzard locked them in for 3 days, the family huddled together in the warm glow of the fire. The cowboy, his voice deep and steady, told stories to the children about how he and their mother met. Mary sat beside him, her fingers laced with his, smiling as their youngest climbed into his lap. She knew that if someone had told her years ago, she'd end up here in a home full of laughter. With a husband who saw her worth, she wouldn't have believed it. When the storm passed and the sun returned, she stepped outside, the cold biting her cheeks, and looked across the snow-covered fields. The future stretched wide before her, as vast and open as the prairie itself. Her father's words from long ago no longer held any power. She hadn't just proved him wrong, she had rewritten the story of her life entirely, and as her husband came to stand beside her, his large hand enveloping hers, Mary knew there was nothing the world could say to diminish what they had built. They had carved out a life together, weathered storms, both real and metaphorical, and found a love that would carry them through every season yet to come. Years later, when the children were grown and had families of their own, the ranch had become a gathering place. Every holiday, wagons and trucks rolled up the long dirt road, bringing grandchildren who tumbled out laughing, filling the air with the same chaos Mary had once feared she'd never know. The giant cowboy, hair now streaked with silver, still carried himself with the same strength as the day she met him, though his steps had slowed. He built cradles for each new grandchild, carving their names into the wood by hand, just as he had done for their own children. One warm summer evening, they sat together on the porch swing, the sound of cicadas rising from the tall grass. Mary rested her head on his shoulder, watching the sunset blaze across the horizon. "Do you ever think about the day we met?" she asked. "All the time," he replied. "It was the day I saw my whole life waiting for me," she smiled, tears catching in her lashes. "I was so scared back then." "You were brave," he corrected. "Just didn't know it yet." Their silence after was comfortable, filled with the rustle of leaves and the laughter of their grandchildren somewhere in the distance. Mary's thoughts drifted again to her father. He had passed quietly years ago, but not before telling her, in a rare moment of vulnerability, that he had been wrong. She had held his hand then, choosing forgiveness over the weight of old wounds. Now, sitting in the golden glow of twilight, Mary realized she had everything she had ever wanted, not because she had chased it, but because she had chosen to believe she deserved it. The cowboy squeezed her hand. "We've had a good life," he said simply. "The best," she answered. As the first stars appeared in the vast sky, she knew their story wasn't just about proving someone wrong. It was about building something so right, it outshone every shadow of the past. And in that quiet, she whispered a silent promise that their love, like the ranch, would stand strong for generations to come.